Hello, welcome to this morning's session where Centurus will cover IBM Cognos Mobile Reporting on iPad. I'd like to just do a sound check if anybody can type into their GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar panel and just confirm that you can hear, or you can just raise your virtual hand, which is on there. Okay, super. Thank you, Rudy. All right, the iPad. Saw a press release that Apple released their newest iPad, and they sold 5 million iPads in the first 3 days. And it's the numbers of these devices that are making it out there in business, largely because of people buy them for their home use, but they like to use them in business. The iPad and the related product, the other product, we're using the same operating system, the iOS operating system. They are phenomenally successful. There are amazing numbers of units out there. I don't know if many people realize how big this business is, but if you take the Apple's iPhone business alone, just the iPhone headsets, not counting all the apps they sell around it, but just the iPhones alone, that business now does more revenue than all of Microsoft. Now Microsoft's phone business, now Microsoft's tablet business, all of Microsoft. So Apple iPhone alone is bigger than all of Microsoft. Giving just a little bit of context on why it's important to be able to satisfy the business demand now for being able to display business intelligence and content and interactive content on the iPad. All right, go next slide. All right, we'll have a formal question and answer period at the end of the session, but we encourage interaction throughout. We find that in-session questions tend to provide relevant context. So we want to make sure you leave with helpful answers, so feel free to use the GoToWebinar control panel to communicate with us. This slide deck has quite a bit of information, and you'd probably like to know how to get a copy of it. So go to centurus.com. The Resources tab under Recorded Webinars, Demos, and White Papers. There's a whole listing of all of our content that we have, our education content, and then you'll do a scroll down to the section on IBM Cognos Business Intelligence, and you'll find the link so you can download a copy of this slide deck. All right, our session today, we're going to do a quick introduction, and then we'll get right into active reports on the iPad. We'll you can just give an overview, then we'll get into some of the design considerations. A lot of these things we've discovered some of them the hard way. It's you know, a situation where vendors are really excited about their product, maybe not fully disclosing some of the things that are challenges in it, but our mission is to help people be successful with these, and as part of that, you got to know where you're going to hit limitations or challenges. So we'll cover those as well. Then we'll do a demonstration of both the end user experience of Cognos on the iPad and also the development environment, and showing some of the techniques for developing content for the iPad. And then we'll cover a little bit of additional resources about how you can learn more. Preferably you're learning more at a Cognos, a Centurus training class on active reports, for instance, that we have coming up. And then we'll end with a Q&A session. I'm Greg Herrera, the CEO and founder of Centurus, and with me today is Jugal Shah. He's one of our most experienced consultants. Jugal's worked with several different BI tools, including Cognos Business Objects, ClickView, and he's been specializing in report development for the last several years. He's worked recently with Report Studio to build regular and active reports for many clients across many industries, including finance, retail, and high tech. The most recent deployment was active reports for a worldwide financial services client. He's been a presenter at industry events, in particular the Northern California Cognos Users Group recently. All right, just a quick slide on giving the context of who we are. We're a consulting company, and we specialize in corporate performance management. The biggest part of our practice is our business intelligence practice, and that involves both business intelligence training and also consulting. Many of you in the audience know of us for our training, and we encourage you to continue to use Centuris for training. But as you'll find from many of our clients, that the same expertise that you hear on training, it's nice to have on site for some projects. So we encourage you to consider us for project work as well. We've been at it for 12 years. We've done over 1,200 projects now for over 600 clients. Got to update that slide. And we've got a combination of business and technical depth that our customers are telling us that is unmatched versus other firms that they've considered. Next slide. Our client list includes companies of all sizes. Given that we've been at this for so long with so many companies, chances are real good that we've helped clients who've had the same types of opportunities or challenges in business intelligence as you do today. And we hope to earn the opportunity to work with you as well. And at this point, I will hand it over to Jugal Shah. Welcome, Jugal. Thank you very much for putting the time in to prepare this session. And audience, I'll tell you, I did the review, and this is going to be a very educational session. So thanks for joining us. Here you go, Jugal.
Thanks a lot, Greg. Well, good morning, everybody. And this is Jugal Shah, like Greg mentioned. I am going to be talking to you about active reports on the iPad. We'll go through an overview of the tool, what is it like to look at controls on the iPad, some design considerations, what are the limitations that the tool has, and then we'll go through some quick recommendations from an overall tool perspective and also from a security standpoint. Like Greg mentioned earlier, iPads, they're going pretty big in terms of how consumption of data is happening on the corporate front. And if you are thinking of implementing any of your analytics from Cognos on the iPad, hopefully today's session will give you some good takeaways. So we have quite a bit of content to get started, and let's get going. All right, so when we talk about active reports on the iPad, one of the first things that comes to mind is to download the IBM Cognos mobile app. It's available for free in the App Store, and it seamlessly integrates with active reports. The app recognizes specific interactive objects on the report. It makes consumption of the content fairly easy. Things like the swiping feature, they're pretty nice to consume on this app. And in addition, the app also allows you to run active report content from your BI server environment. So you could log into your BI server through the app and run active reports, open its output as an MHT file, and consume it that way. You could also run regular Report Studio reports from the app and open its output. Additionally, active reports can be consumed indirectly from an email. So if you have a corporate email messaging system that is pushing out emails to your iPad, if you have an MHT file as an attachment, you could consume it that way. You could also consume it through your personal account. If somebody sends you an MHT file through, say, a Gmail account, you can open it that way. So it's pretty convenient in terms of how consumption can happen on the iPad for this content. Active reports are developed using the Report Studio environment, so there's really no new authoring environment to learn. It's pretty simple and straightforward for those of you who have already gotten accustomed to building regular Report Studio reports. It's just a matter of picking up some of those nuances of active reports in terms of what are the objects that are available out there. How are they interactive? How do you connect them? And things like that. And then specific development of how to develop and design for the iPad, we'll consider those. So there's some learning to take place over there as well. The output of an active report is in the form of an MHTML file. So it's a .mht file. It carries with it not just the data behind the scenes that is needed, but it also packs in the presentation content and the images that go in with the files. So it basically is a self-contained file that pretty much carries everything in it, which makes it really easy to consume it in an offline mode as well. Actor reports can be consumed in several different ways, obviously on your desktop or laptop and on the iPad, and you can also put them into Business Insight with your other analytic content for the company. So if you have management or your senior executive team that's used to logging in each morning and getting into Business Insight to track some of the analytics you may have there, you can build your actor reports and put them out there to be consumed and interacted with along with that. So it makes it really easy to integrate actor reports with your existing content. All right, continuing on, actor reports can be scheduled and burst to a broad user base. So just like in regular Report Studio reports, you can use the scheduling and bursting capability with these reports. This can really help with containing not just file sizes, but it also contains security, which we'll discuss a little more in detail. So that's a good thing that you can use your scheduling and bursting feature that some of you may already be using for regular Report Studio reports. With regards to server installation, the IBM Cognos Mobile is installed separately into your existing Cognos BI environment. So the Cognos Mobile server component is required, and it is required for mobile-friendly delivery of Cognos reports. That's true even for standard Report Studio reports. While Safari on the iPad is not a supported browser environment for regular BI server, it is a supported browser environment for the mobile server. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, this next slide, it gives a good pictorial view of what offline security is when you're deploying reports on iPad, active reports on iPad. So basically what you're seeing here is a red secure perimeter area. It basically signifies what your corporate network looks like on, in the BI environment. And you see that the iPad is shown half in and half out. So whilst the iPad is in the secure perimeter, everything is maintained from a policy and a security standpoint that is, maintained on your server. So your reports can be consumed through the iPad, like we talked about earlier. You can log in to the server and the environment just like you would from your desktop and consume reports in that way. When it's outside of the secure perimeter, the reports can be consumed through, something like a Dropbox out-of-band resource, or you could email reports to the iPad and, consume it that way. At that point in time, the security that is driven is completely by the device. So anything that you may have set up on the device for getting into the device, such as a PIN, or the security is dictated by whatever is embedded into the active report itself in the MHT file. And we'll discuss that a little more. But just wanted to give you a sense of what offline security looks like. All right, controls on the iPad. When you're designing for the iPad, you want to keep in mind some of the objects and how they'll render on that device as opposed to the desktop. Your development is going to be happening on the desktop. And what you're seeing here is two objects. For example, the slider up on the top and the button bar below it. That's how it looks on the desktop on the left. And then they render a little differently when you're seeing them on the iPad. So the button bar, the edges are, look a little different on the iPad. They render a little differently in terms of color and the highlighted button. Also, the slider shows up a little differently. Sometimes, depending on the object, the sizing may be a little different on the iPad compared to the desktop and how it gets laid out. So, excuse me, that's something to keep in mind. Also, you can enable swiping gestures on deck controls. And, for those of you who are not familiar with this, we'll get a little more of that You'll hear me talk a lot more about decks and cards and things like that, but we'll get a little more into it in the demo. You can enable swiping gestures using an iterator object or by defining animation properties for the decks. So yeah, when I'm talking about decks, I'm not into online gambling, but we'll get into a little bit of that later on. Okay, iPad design considerations. It's really key when you're designing for the iPad that you have in mind what your screen resolution is like, how much screen real estate you have to put your different objects. You want to keep the 1024 by 704 pixel size in mind when you're putting your different objects on the report layout page. Now, interestingly, this is the same for an iPad mini. So when you are designing for a regular iPad, the same screen resolution shows up on the iPad mini, and you don't have to do anything to get that to resolve or show up nicely on that screen. So that's kind of nice. One thing that's important is, let's say you have 4 or 5 different objects on your screen. When you're putting these objects through the development process, it's very important that you assign a size for each of those objects. Sometimes Cognos might put in a default size, or you can say, okay, give it 100% height or width. But every time you put in an object and you define a particular size, that's what makes your layout pretty crisp. You can control any changes that may be needed further downstream. If you needed to add a 6th object or remove an object, then you can figure out where you want to lay them out. So it's definitely recommended you size your objects out accordingly. There are also times where if you put too many objects on the screen, there might be a reason for your end users to scroll, top to bottom or left to right, and you'd need 2 fingers to scroll. But I'd recommend you not do too much of that. One is because if you have content that you're not seeing on the screen, end users might miss seeing that content completely. And secondly, even if they do see that there's content that they need to scroll to, it becomes a little cumbersome for them to keep doing that if they need to get to the other content that's not visible. So you want to make the user experience refreshing, keep it crisp, clean, and that's kind of nice to do when you're designing for this device. Something else to keep in mind is that a list box is replaced with a drop-down list when you show it on the iPad. So when you're designing for it on the desktop, it's going to show up as a list box, and it's automatically going to convert to a drop-down list on the iPad. So just something to keep in mind. And then most importantly, you want to consider the size of the touchable regions of your different objects that you can interact with. You might have objects like tables or lists or graphs, and it's important that you understand what kind of a height size you want to set for some of these objects. Apple recommends 44 pixel height for some of these objects that you're going to be interacting with. For example, if you have a table or a list, you want to keep a row height of about 44 pixels at a minimum. Some of the chart areas may be too small to touch, so this is especially true for maps. Again, keep in mind how you're placing the map object or the chart object and which areas in that object are going to be interactive. So you want to keep in mind how you're sizing that so that, again, the end user doesn't end up fat-fingering it and, going to a different part of the report that they didn't intend to go to. All right. Let's look at some limitations that Active Reports have as a tool. Well, one of the first things that comes to mind is object property limitations. As I've gone through some of the design process for clients, I've seen that there are some objects that you can't adjust the height for example, the button or the button bar or a drop-down list. And this might be an important consideration for you to keep in mind when you're putting these objects on the screen, so you know where to put them on the screen. And the fact that you can't adjust the height, is that a limitation in terms of how you want to show and interact with the content? Something else that comes to mind is, adjusting the pie chart angle. I bring this up because a lot of times end users have mock-ups that are showing up in Excel. They build it out in Excel, and Excel has this ability to angle the pie chart that you want in a certain way. And if you can't do that in Active Report, you want to kind of set expectations with your end users up front. So as you work with these objects, you'll see more of this, but it's not, you don't see that happening too often. Here are some instances that I've seen some experience with in terms of limitations, so I wanted to bring that up. There's no built-in graphing engine for Active Reports, and as a result, everything that is graphed is rendered, stored as an image in the MHT file. So, that's again something to keep in mind because it does add to the file size every time you put in a graph and run the report and store it as an image. There's no, graphing engine that's running at the time that you're interacting with the report. Drill downs, again, are not truly supported. You can have something like a simulated drill down that you can build into your report, but it doesn't have a true drill down. You're not actually going back to the server and running some external reports or queries and then bringing the data back. Everything is self-contained in the file like we've talked about before. So, for example, you can simulate a drill down where, let's say you have a graph for Europe and you want the user to interact with the graph by touching it, and it brings up 4 or 5 different graphs for different countries in Europe. And you can simulate that by attaching those graphs, those 5 different country graphs, on a card that is then controlled by this other chart object, and you can simulate that drill down, but it's not truly supported. There's no ability to print active reports from the iPad or the laptop. So that might be a limiting factor if your end users are used to consuming certain reports on the screen and then they want to print it out. You will see, for example, on the laptop, when you're seeing the output of an active report, and let's say you have a crosstab and a chart, and you go to print and look at the print preview, you'll probably end up seeing that chart and crosstab being distributed across 4 different print pages with some embedded MHTML content in there. So it's really basically not a very printer-friendly format that you can work with. Active reports, they're intended to be consumed as individual files. There's no embedded data-driven security in there. Think of it like an independent Excel file, and that's how it works. They can't, for now, be consumed on iPhones, Android, or other mobile devices. Although IBM has said that they do have plans to make these available on other devices, but that's something I wanted to kind of put out here for you guys. And then most importantly, in terms of report limitations, is the size. When you're designing, you want to try and keep the file size between 5 and 10 MB. The moment your file size gets bigger than that, you start seeing some performance issues in terms of, just being a lag in when you're saving the file or you're rendering the file on the desktop or the iPad. So you want to try and maintain the file size between 5 and 10. And, active reports are not meant as a distribution channel for detailed reports. So if you have, daily data-heavy operational reporting that has a lot of charts and images, is very data-intensive, goes back and looks at a lot of rows of data, you might not want to use active reports to distribute content like that. On the other hand, active reports are pretty good in terms of delivering high-level data views. So if you have, content for your senior executive team or management that shows them some dashboarding information or key metrics, that are delivered weekly or monthly or even daily, it's a good medium for you to provide something that's very interactive, that you can consume offline on a mobile device. Again, some of these features are just not available on regular Report Studio reports. So it does have a lot of pluses, but, wanted to highlight some of the limitations as well. Okay. Recommendations. We've talked about the Cognos Mobile iPad native app. Definitely recommend using that to consume your content. It makes rendering and accessing the content easy and user-friendly. The second bullet is kind of important. You want to plan adequately to look at how much time it's going to take to develop your reports, primarily because of the cycling that happens between the laptop and the iPad. And that can be time-consuming. There are instances where, let's say you have a few objects, like I gave in my example earlier, you have a few objects on your report and you want to add another object. Well, if you've sized your objects correctly and you want to add a sixth object, every single change on the report that you make, let's say you add 5 more pixels in width to object number 1 and you reduce the height of object number 3 and you accommodate object number 6. Well, you don't want to make all these changes at the same time and then show how it looks on the iPad, because how you make changes to colors, sizing of the objects, how these objects render on the iPad versus the desktop, you want to make it incremental in terms of making the changes, and then run your file, save it, email it, say, to your iPad, or log into your BI server from the iPad app, and then open up your MHD file and see what that change looked like. All of this can be time-consuming. So again, I just caution you that you want to plan adequately for developing some of these reports on the iPad, because if you're not used to it initially, it might be a little different than what you're used to with regular Report Studio reports. You would want to evaluate your mobile email tools compatibility with MHD files. This is important, especially if your distribution strategy for content like this is going to be via email. You might want to configure the MHD file as a valid file type in your third-party mobile messaging tool, which is typically configured at the tool's server level. If the MHD file is not recognized by your tool, then it becomes a moot point when your end user receives an email but can't really open the file type. So there's some conversation that you might need to have with the folks who are managing that messaging tool and kind of get that to work with the MHD file type. You should definitely leverage the scheduling and bursting content of the active reports like we've discussed earlier. Scheduling for sure, because again, if you're going to be emailing reports every morning, early in the morning, or every week, you want to leverage scheduling. And then the bursting, especially because it helps you manage file sizes. It helps you break them up into different sizes. You want to keep naming conventions of objects clean and consistent. And what I mean by that is when you are adding objects to your report layout, you might start adding data deck 1 and then data deck 2 and then chart 1 and chart 2. A lot of times these default names that Report Studio provides are good, but once you have a lot of these objects sitting in your report and we are trying to make connections using our report variables, it becomes very difficult to identify what is data deck 3 versus chart 16. And I encourage you to really make the naming convention as explicit as possible. All right, and then the last recommendation is to really make sure that your file sizes are manageable, which we talked about earlier. And there's a few ways to do this. One is to break down your report into multiple reports, and you can leverage this through the bursting feature. So that's a good thing. You could minimize the number of charts. For example, if you have 2 charts with the same dimensions, could you combine them with a combination chart? Or as long as it's analytically viable, try to minimize the number of charts, because charts are stored as images, and images can add to file size pretty quickly. We'll also look into the permutations and combinations when we go through the demo of how these charts or objects can quickly add up depending on how you're placing them on the cards or decks. So again, design aspects of how you're placing objects and how you're utilizing them is important in terms of minimizing how many permutations and combinations you have for charts or other objects. You want to reuse the active report variables as much as you can, and again, we'll get into the demo with the active report variables. But variables are used when you make a connection between 2 objects, and you're using values to pass between the two objects using an active report variable. So if you have object A that is being connected to object B with a variable, and you want to now connect object A to C, can you use the same variable to do that if it's analytically viable? So you want to kind of minimize duplication of variables as much as possible. Try and push calculations and data consolidations in the model or the package where possible. Now, this is true even for regular Report Studio reports. You want to try and have as much of the data movement or consolidation or the calculation happening behind the scenes in the package. So that way, when you're running your report in the queries, it doesn't take as much time to run them. It doesn't take as much time to save your report and then render it on the device that you're consuming it at. So that's an important consideration for reducing file size. And then use layout component references where possible. Layout component references are basically just shortcuts. They're nothing more than that. And they're pretty useful when they are trying to work with different graphs or images. One example that I can think of is, say, a company logo. If you have a company logo that you want to put on every card of the deck, you want to probably end up using just one image and then have a layout component reference for all the other cards on the deck. So that will definitely help keep your file size in check. And that's possible even with other objects like charts or tables. All right. Next slide. Security considerations. Give me a second. I'll just get a drink of water, please. All right. For those of you folks who have content that's pretty secure, it's important you try and use some or all of these recommendations to make sure that you have content that's secure on your mobile device. And one of them is to try and enforce a security policy on your mobile devices. You could ensure that your end users on your mobile device need a PIN to get into the device, especially if the device is something that is being provided by the company. That's something that you might want to look into. You want to set up an access code for the MHT files during development of the active report. You can do that by going into File, Active Report Properties, and set up an access code, and we'll try and take a look at that during the demo. Think of this more like an Excel file when you're setting up a password for the Excel file, and then every time you want to open the password, the Excel file, you need to provide the password. Now, this is true even in the case of consumption of on the desktop. So whether it's on the desktop or the iPad, whether it's in an offline mode or in the secure perimeter of your corporate network, you're going to need the access code if that's something the developer has embedded into it. Also, this access code is embedded into the MHT file. It's encrypted, and so you can't really just go behind the scenes in the XML of the report and pull out the access code. It's encrypted in there. So it's a pretty neat feature, and I highly recommend you use this to secure your content. You want to think about how the mobile devices will get access to your BI server. So is it going to be through Wi-Fi or the intranet or VPN, and which of these mediums are secure enough for the data that you're trying to distribute? So you want to think about that. Think about if there's any additional device management needed on your iPad, such as remote wipe. So if your iPad is lost or stolen and somebody tries to log into it using 4 or 5 different incorrect attempts of the PIN, it may initiate a remote wipe. Remote wiping is an iOS function. It can be performed using the Find My iPad functionality that's provided by Apple. So that's, again, something you might want to look into. You can also tune parameters on the server for local storage encryption, or decide the length of time that you want to allow offline access for your content for the active reports. And that is typically done with the IBM Cognos Mobile Lease Key mechanism. This is kind of pretty neat the lease key is configured from Cognos administration's web interface inside Cognos Connection. For data that's been downloaded to your mobile device, the lease key basically just determines the maximum number of hours that the data will be available on the device, only when it's out of contact with the server. So it keeps in track when you're in an offline mode, how long will this data be available. So essentially, it's a good way to safeguard your data in case it's, the device is lost or stolen. The lease is automatically renewed every time the device successfully connects back into the server. So, for example, if you have a lease period that's set for 24 hours and your device is logging into the server once a day, then basically the stored data would be continually accessible to your end user. So that's just a little bit of information about the lease key mechanism and how that works. And then finally, you would want to try and store your active report content in secured folders. You want to especially do this if you're bursting your content. It's nice if you have different levels of your hierarchy that are going into different folders. Then you can provide access to a very specific audience that needs to get to that data. All right, so that's security considerations. Next, we have a demo coming up. So let me get going on that. All right, so what I'm going to do here for the demo is I'm going to give you all a brief overview of what the MHT file looks like for one of the reports, and then also take you behind the scenes and show you what is involved in putting some of these objects together in Report Studio in building out the active report. So I'll go ahead and give you all a quick overview of the interactivity of the objects that you're seeing in this MHT file here. All right, so essentially this is a customer satisfaction report. It gives the end user some idea about customer satisfaction by product, by region. There's information of a customer survey that was conducted, and information of what were the results of that, and then also by order method. So I'm going to give you a slight technical overview of what these objects look like, and then, like I said, we'll go behind the scenes. So what you're seeing here on the top is a button bar, and it has 3 buttons, and each of these 3 buttons are connected to a deck that has 3 cards, and each of those 3 cards has different objects that are laid out onto those cards. This first button is connecting to a card that is invisible to the end user, but the card is basically storing all this content that you're seeing here. The next button is interacting with another card on this deck, and it has these objects, which I'll get into a little bit of detail in due time. And then we have a third button that is Customer Survey that has information for that on a third card of the deck. Okay, so Customer Return Overview. This particular card has a radio button group up here on the top. And I can switch between the 2 years, 2005 and 6. And as you notice, as I'm switching, it's controlling these 2 objects, this combination chart here and this pie chart here, based on what year I'm selecting. Also, if you notice, you'll see these dots over here at the bottom of this pie chart object. That's a data iterator. That will allow me to swipe across different cards of this pie chart. Now, I must say that I'm demoing this from a laptop, and had this content was this consumed on the iPad, you could easily swipe left and right using a finger to see the different regional images of that pie chart. Okay. Further down, we have a discrete data slider that has these 4 different values, and this discrete data slider is controlling the 2 objects that you're seeing over here. These are, again, combination charts that are getting controlled by this object. So if I click unsatisfactory product value on this slider, it shows me the corresponding images that are rendered by this chart. So I'm going to interact with this a little more and let you see how that works. Okay. Let's look at this next card, the regional return by order method. This is essentially providing a regional view of what the returns look like. And so this is for Northern Europe right now. If I switch this out to Americas, it's controlling the objects that you're seeing at the bottom over here. So we have a bunch of gate charts that are showing by order method, by web, telephone, and sales visit what our returns look like for that Americas region. We have the same thing by order method in a different view. And then we have a crosstab at the bottom. All of this is getting controlled by the dropdown. All right. And then finally, we have the customer survey button that has two objects on it on this card. So we have a crosstab by region, and then we have a corresponding another object that shows corresponding data in terms of a chart, again by region. And each of these have a data iterator below them. So again, you can swipe across different regions left to right to go through the data accordingly. All right. Let's take a look behind the scenes of what was done to put this together. Let me make sure I still have connectivity to the server. Okay, I think we're in good shape. All right, so this is what it looks like behind the scenes in Report Studio, in Active Reports. So up on the top, I'm going to do a little bit of flipping back and forth to show you what the design looks like compared to the MHD file. Also, I'm showing this at a slightly lower resolution, which will need me to do a little more scrolling left and right to give you all a better idea of what the content on this card looks like. But hopefully, we'll be able to get through the basic premise of what I'm trying to show. All right, so if you notice, I talked about a button bar here on the top, and the button bar was connecting to a deck on the card. Sorry, a card on the deck. So what we're seeing here is a button bar, and it has 3 buttons, and each of those are defined based on a value provided for the label. We have customer return overview, regional return by order method, and customer survey. This is now connecting to a deck that has 3 cards on it, and the values for those 3 cards are defined here. And they're the same values that were defined for the data button bar. So as you see, if the end user clicks on this button, it'll take the end user to this card based on the value that is generated, that is being passed by a certain active report variable. So now we're talking about active report variables that we had talked about in the slide deck. Those active report variables are seen over here. So we have a whole bunch of them that were used when this report was built. And the vCard variable is what is being used to pass values from the labels from this object to this object. And to dive a little more into that, I want to show you the interactive behavior of this object. So as you can see, the vCard variable is being used to pass value from here to the deck. The button bar is selecting the deck using the vCard variable and the values from that label to this label. You remember me talking about being explicit and clean about how your naming conventions are? That's what I was talking about, button bar, deck. These are there by default. So I would probably say this is what you probably shouldn't be doing. An example of what you shouldn't be doing, you don't want to name it deck 1, deck 2, button bar 1, button bar 5. try to be a little more explicit. So this could probably be customer return overview deck or what have you. So that way you can easily connect some of these objects as they start growing in numbers. Okay, so that's as far as connectivity is concerned between objects. I wanted to give you all a sense of how they connect behind the scenes, how do you provide values, and so on and so forth. Okay, let's look at another object. So we go back to the MHT file. We remember seeing this radio button group. And this radio button group is controlling these two objects over here below it. What this does is it's a data radio button group, as you see here. It's data-driven, so it's a little different than how we assign values to these objects over here. We just simply type them in. Well, this is a little more dynamic. It's actually going to get the values behind the scenes from a query. So we're not saying the value of the year is 2005 and 6 in the object itself. We're actually deriving that from a query. So if I expand this out a little more, okay, the query feeding this data button radio group is customer survey query. If I go to that query, we have a data item called year, and that year is getting filtered for 2005 and 2006. So that is what is driving what you're seeing over here in the MHT file. If this query were to change to show 2007, 8, and 9, it's going to dynamically change over here accordingly. So that's kind of neat about how you can make some of these objects dynamic with changes in the data. If your business process changes or if your data changes behind the scenes, these reports are pretty dynamic to capture all of that, and that's what makes them pretty nice and user-friendly. Okay, going back to the page and doing a little more of my scrolling up and down. Please bear with me. Okay. So this object is based on year, like I talked about, and it's interacting with another object that's a data deck. So a data deck simply has a whole bunch of cards on that, in it. And this, in this case, it's driven off of year. So whatever year you select, that year is going to pass the value to this data deck and show the corresponding card on the deck. So to make it simple to understand, this deck would have two cards, one for 2005 and another for 2006. And depending on what year you select here, it displays that card. And those cards, in turn, have a combination chart on that. So to make it simple, this data deck has two combination chart images that are stored in the MHT file. So now you're beginning to get a sense of how charts are stored as images and how images take up space and essentially how you can control some of the sizing of your MHT file depending on how you design these objects. All right. Similarly, we have another data deck that is storing these pie charts, and that is also driven off of year. So in this case, we'd again have two cards for 2005 and 6 for this data deck. What gets interesting here is you have another data deck that's embedded on top of the data deck that's over here, and that one is driven by region. Now I know based on my data behind the scenes that we have 5 regions. So what this data deck is going to do is it's going to generate 5 cards for each of those regions. So essentially this data deck has 5 times 2, 10 images being stored for these pies. If you want to start counting images and correlate how images are translating into file size, we have 10 over there and then 2 over here, adding up to 12 images between this combination. Now, if your data was dynamic, like I said, and you run this report, and this year is now changing from just 05 and 06 to include 07 as well, you've just increased your number of images times 5 because you added just one more year just in this data deck. So again, keep in mind how some of your data changes is going to impact file sizes, because that's becoming a little relevant in terms of how this is coming through. All right. moving on, we talked about sliders. So here is a, no, that's not what I want. Okay, the data discrete value slider. Again, this is data driven. So what you're seeing here in terms of these values for defective product, unsatisfactory product, wrong product, ordered and shipped, these values are coming behind the scenes from a query. If your data has a fifth reason that shows up in next month, then this object is going to dynamically change to show that. And then this is getting connected based on reason description. So every time I select a different reason description, my objects, my combination charts over here are changing. So it's based on reason description. We have a data deck based on reason description that is connecting to this object over here on the top. Same structure we have going on over here. We have a data deck for this combination chart that's connecting based on reason description. All right. Let's look at regional return by order method. This particular button is controlling a card that has a drop-down based on region. And when I change these, as you noticed, it's controlling these objects at the bottom. So going back, I'm going to change the card on this deck to that corresponding card. And again, keep in mind this is a deck and not a data deck. So that is your data drop-down list. And this is, again, based on region. It's controlling a bunch of these gate charts that are all sitting on a data deck, as you see. And the number of cards on this data deck is driven off of the region field in the query. So in this case, you'd have 5 cards being generated in this data deck because you have 5 regions showing up over here. And then each of those values on the drop-down are controlling these objects over here. So you have a combination chart, all these gate charts up on the top, and then a crosstab. Okay. Let's see. Customer survey. That was one more thing that I wanted to show you all. So if I go to customer survey, we have 2 objects here by region again. One is a crosstab along the top. And then here is a corresponding image or a chart of that data, again by region. And as you notice, there's iterators that are showing up at the bottom to tell the user you could swipe through these objects. I wanted to spend a little bit of time showing you all what the iterator looks like and how you can manage that. So there is a corresponding data iterator that is controlling the swiping mechanism for this particular crosstab here. If you notice, the iterator is based on, again, region, so it's connecting to the cards up on the top based on region, and it's allowing you to flip between the cards based on region. Within the data iterator, you have something called the iterator label area, and you can actually select a different user interface, a different UI for your end user. In this case, it's this page dot indicator that is being used to tell the user you could swipe across. You could actually change that to say a drop-down list. When you do that, you see how it changed to a drop-down list, and when you were to run, if you were to run this report again, you'd see a drop-down list over here at the bottom, and use that drop-down list for Americas or Asia or the different regions to navigate across different cards on the deck. So that's about the data iterator. The other thing I wanted to show y'all is the access code that I talked about earlier. So to secure your active report, you can go to File, go to Active Report Properties, and then you see the access code. You can just basically provide an access code at the time of development. And when your end users open your MHT file that you're seeing over here, at that point in time, it'll prompt you for an access code. And that's true, like I said, regardless whether it's on the desktop or the iPad in an offline mode, on an online mode. So you need this to be able to secure your content. All right, I think that's basically it, what I wanted to show you all in terms of demoing the active reports. Hopefully this demo puts into perspective what, some of the things that I was talking about on the slides. And hopefully it's given you some information that you can take away and see, hey, can I implement active reports in my analytic distribution strategy for my company? So that's pretty much it. Let me go back to the slide deck, and I will hand this over back to Greg. He wants to share some additional information for resources available to you all. Right, Greg, back to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Great job, Jugal. I'm looking at the questions that are coming in, and it's like you were able to read their minds, because a question would come in like, oh, how do you build a data iterator? And then a few seconds later, you'd say, well, let me show you how to build a data iterator. So that was very fortunate. A couple of housekeeping items that I forgot to mention earlier are that, one, we were recording this session, and the playback recording will be available on Centurus.com in about a week. And what we do with our recording playbacks is we chop them into chapters so that you can go directly to a section that you want to see. So, for instance, the demo section itself will be chopped into multiple chapters so that you can go directly to what you want to get. The other item that I forgot to mention, and I want to thank the audience for reminding me, is that we take all the questions that come in on the Q&A, and we spend a couple of days answering them all. Some require some research, and then we write up the answers, and we make that Q&A write-up available on Centurus.com as well. When the recording and the Q&A are available, everybody in the audience today, and in fact even the people that didn't attend but just registered, will receive an email letting you know where it is, and so you can go check that out. All right. And by the way, keep the questions coming. We have a team of panelists that is reviewing them and getting the answers out, and then we'll also cover some more in the Q&A session. Go ahead with the next slide there, Jugal. All right. So what we're trying to do is be as consistent with the value that we're providing here, and so we have other webinars that are covering good topics coming up, and our next one will be December 6th, and it's on a product. It's dealing with a topic that is actually very important to a lot of companies that are, especially the companies that are mature in business intelligence. They've been doing business intelligence for a long time, and one of the challenges that is that vexes most companies is the ability to have manage hierarchies and better have a means that you can allow end users directly to manage hierarchies and dimensions in your BI systems. What a lot of mature BI shops experience is that it gets to be where the IT group or the BI team is kind of the bottleneck in getting all the dimensional attributes and hierarchies and alternate hierarchies set, and that every time a user wants a different view or different hierarchy, they have to put in a request for IT to do that. Well, so that's a problem that's begging for a solution that says, well, why don't we create a nice, easy-to-use product for end users to be able to manage that, and then everybody's happy. IT doesn't like being a bottleneck, and business doesn't like having to hand things over. So there's a product that IBM has, and we call it IBM's best kept secret, because now we find, talking to folks, not a lot of people know about it. It's called Business Viewpoint, and it's a fantastic product for being able to do that. So we're covering that topic on December 6th. December 12th, we're covering Cognos 10.2 under the hood there have been quite a few in the 2 years since Cognos 10 shipped. They've done quite a bit of work in the IBM development labs and have put a lot of new functionality in there. We're going to cover an update on the functionality within Cognos 10.2. And then included in that is a very important piece of functionality that we're chopping out to its own session, and that's dynamic cubes. Everybody in the audience who has felt like they've hit the limits on PowerPlay cubes definitely definitely want to attend on January 24th when we do that deep dive on dynamic cubes, because one of the major advantages that dynamic cubes are bringing versus PowerPlay cubes is scalability. You can deal with many more records and categories and sizes, and yet it's running aggregated in memory, and it's phenomenal speeds. We've seen some tests where you've got 30 billion rows in your fact table, 65 million categories in a customer dimension, and you're still getting some 1-2 seconds response times on queries against that. So it's a really significant add to Cognos 10.2, and it's actually not a V1 product. This is actually technology that IBM had been developing in their DB2 group, and they've moved it over to Cognos. So it's actually quite mature for its first iteration within the Cognos suite. And even better is it's included at no extra charge. So that's definitely something that you're going to want to get an understanding of, and we'll have that session in January. All right, next slide. When you go to, if you looked at our responses about where you go to get the recording and the recorded webinars from today's session, you go to Centuris.com and then the resources page, recorded webinars, and you're able, that's where today's slide deck is already there, and that's where the Q&A and the playback recording will be available. But the point I'd like to make is that not only today's session is available there, but many other items from previous sessions that we've had, plus just tips and techniques that we make a little video on. Those are available there. We have I don't know, close to 100 different topics that you can check out on our resources page. Next slide. All right. I think based on a lot of the questions and feedback that we were getting, this is one of the main answers that the folks wanted to know. How do I learn more about active reports and become very good at it? And there you go. Authoring Active Reports, our training class. It's a full-day training class. It's instructor-led online training, so you can do it from your office or from your home. And we set you up in the Centuris virtual classroom, and you'll have full interaction, full environment for you to do the lab work, and the instructor is there to ask questions of, and actually even through our classroom setup can see what you're doing on your screen, so it can give you the guidance there. It's a very, very effective training program. And our next class in Active Reports is January 23rd. These do have limited seating, so I suggest you get in and use that December end-of-year money that if you don't spend it in December, you'd lose it. So you can register here in December and attend in January. That's true of any class that we have next year. So we look forward to you guys taking advantage of our training offerings. All right, next slide I think is the Q&A. So back to the GoToWebinar control panel, and you have a means of answering the questions for us, and then we'll get to those. And most of these will go to Jugal, but Albert, if you, I don't think I announced that Albert Valdez, the head of our training business, is with us today on the panel. He's actually been answering a lot of the questions already, and many of you guys know him already. So Albert will pipe in too on some of these. All right. So one of the questions was on active reports. Are active reports the only means of getting Cognos BI content out to the iPad? And Jugal or Albert, are you on to answer that?
Yeah, I'm on.
Yeah, hi Greg, this is Albert.
Great.
Go ahead, Jugal.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's other content, non-active report content that you can consume on the iPad. So if you, for example, download the iPad app, you can certainly log into your, Cognos BI server environment and then, consume other non-active reports as well. So you can go in, log in, run a regular report, studio report, and view the output accordingly. And you can do the same thing for active report content as well. Albert, you wanted to add something?
No, that's basically exactly what I was going to say. So yeah, that's the mobile capabilities have been around actually for a number of years. We're seeing that the devices and the adoption has definitely grown in the most recent 1 or 2 years, as Greg was explaining at the beginning, in terms of why this is such a popular topic. And there have always been the ability for us to run reports over our mobile device. The number of different very important drawbacks of that have been the devices have not really been that well suited for that type of consumption. And the other thing that's still really a big drawback is the latency, right? So if you're going over the air and you're going back and forth each time you interact with the report to your network, which obviously isn't going to be local to you, that has really made the adoption very slow. But with active reports, since we can deliver the interactivity to the device one time and then have the ability to work with that throughout the day, that's really changed the game. So you can still go in and connect to your server and browse the content and run reports, but the experience is going to be a little different, and the active report has really resolved a lot of those issues. So yeah, that's exactly right.
All right. Okay, so thank you for answering that. Great one. There were a couple of questions related to the resolution, and I think they may have come in before you covered that, but it's actually worth repeating. I think even some people came in late after you had covered it. But you had a slide, Jugal, I think, recommending certain resolution size. What was it, 1024 by 7 something?
That's right. Yeah, we had a recommendation to design for a pixel size of 1024 by 704. Again, I want to mention that this is key when you're designing for the iPad because that's the real estate available to you. Now, that is true even for the iPad 3 or the new iPad as it's called. If you design for the 1024 by 704 size, the new iPad with the Retina display will essentially still optimize the entire screen size. And that's true for the iPad mini as well, because the iPad mini's screen resolution is also 1024 by 768. So it's kind of seamless across these devices. If you design for the 1024 by 704 screen size, you're good to go. And one more point I'd like to make that I mentioned earlier is it's 704 and not 768 because the difference is the status bar along the top that gives you things like, the battery power on the iPad or, the date and time. So you definitely want to, design keeping that pixel size in mind. Okay,
yeah, that's 704. It's not a typo. People usually see 768 associated with 1024. Great. Actually, a related question was, have you experienced any issues on iOS version 5 devices versus iOS version 6? That one of the clients said that they heard a report that they were having some rendering controls problems on iOS version 5. I know that your recent project spanned both versions. Did you have rendering controls problems on iOS 5?
I started off, so the recent project that I was working on, I started off on iOS 5. And midway in the project, we had the iOS upgrade, so I think I upgraded it to iOS 6. And for me, it was pretty seamless. I really had no issues. The objects that I was using that had been built into my active reports were working the exact same way in 5 versus 6. So no, there's nothing that I can really think of that had an issue with 5 as such.
Okay. All right. Maybe that was a localized problem. All right. Just for clarity, adding passwords to these active reports, I think you mentioned that of a code, but that's essentially the same thing, right? You can do effectively add passwords, access to active reports.
Yes, that's right. It's a pretty simple process, and I highly recommend that you all make good use of it, because it's you can go, when you're designing the active report, you can go into the File menu, and there's an option for active report properties, and you can just set up the access code right there. It's really simple and effective. It's encrypted. It goes along with your MHT file. You can't really get to it behind the scenes from the XML code. And more importantly, it's needed regardless whether you're consuming this on the desktop or the iPad, or whether you're consuming it in an offline or an online mode. So it's really neat. It's a very effective, quick, simple way to secure your data, and it stays with your file.
Great. Thank you. All right. Several questions came in about converting existing Report Studio reports to active reports. They can see that functionality exists within Report Studio. Albert, do you want to comment on that, about doing that conversion, and then does it automatically pick up active report functionality, or do you have to?
Yeah, that's always kind of an interesting concept. So when you take a traditional report, you can convert it to an active report. All that does is it gives you the ability to then use the active report features. It doesn't magically do anything to create those controls or set those properties or set variables. I always approach the learning around active reports as being kind of equivalent to what you have with prompting. So it would be nice if you could take like a prompted traditional report, convert it, and take all the prompt controls and all of the parameters and convert them to active report controls and variables, but that does not happen. It just makes it possible for you to take all of the kind of fundamental foundational features of your report and then add active report features to that, but it does not. There's no way to kind of magically do that. So it's good that you don't have to rebuild a report from scratch, because if you open up a existing report, you'll notice, hey, I don't have access to any of those active report controls. I can't add variables. It's like it's kind of locked in this different world. When you do the convert, you can start doing that, but it doesn't do any of it for you.
Great. Thank you. All right. Actually, Jim, I don't know if you're still here. Jim Frazier is our Vice President of Sales, and there have been some questions about licensing of active reports. Jim, are you on for that?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I didn't review the questions.
Yeah, are there additional licensing concerns, or are active reports included with Report Studio? What do you have to do differently for active reports?
So the main issue is that active reports, along with a few of the new capabilities in Cognos 10, if you're going to distribute them widely, need an enhanced consumer license. I think that's probably the big issue. Everybody, all Cognos customers have some of the more advanced authoring roles, licenses usually, like administrator or professional or advanced business author. So all of those roles have the ability to use these mobile products, the active reports, as well as the Cognos Mobile. The big change is that with Cognos 10, if you want to distribute, for example, active reports out to a wider audience, they need to have at least an enhanced consumer license or above.
Right. So looking at existing licensing, if they haven't gone to advanced consumers and all they have are consumer licenses, the consumers would need to be upgraded to advanced consumers.
I probably got you saying advanced. It's the enhanced consumer.
Enhanced
yes.
consumer. Sorry about that. Enhanced consumer. But the folks that are already licensed for things like Query Studio, Analysis Studio, those are the enhanced consumer is a component of that already. So if you're already on one of those that gives you rights to Query Studio, Report Studio, Analysis Studio, those,
so I think
you don't need anything different.
That's a good question. I might have to look into that real quickly. But the new role for the other big thing in Cognos 10 is the business insight, which is now with Cognos 10.2 called Cognos Workspace, and that is another one of these capabilities that requires some uplifted licensing. Not huge amounts. There's just incremental license to you would have an incremental upgrade from some of the existing roles to get this functionality, of a few $100s, etc. But for roles like you were just talking about, Greg, that like cover Analysis Studio or Query Studio, the new role where you get everything in Cognos 10 is Advanced Business Author. And so the big question, I guess, just around what you just said is, I'd have to look real quickly if there's anybody. I don't know if Albert, you might know offhand, but if you actually get the ability to deploy the active reports with maybe an author, like an advanced author license or something like that. So, Greg, as you're talking here, I'll just try and see if I can look in that real quick, and I'll come back with an answer.
Yeah, and I'll use it as a pitch too for our. That's one of the licensing matrix is one of the more popular things that we cover when we'll do that Cognos 10.2 under the hood. We have done that for 10.0 and 10.1, and the feedback we get from the audience is that they like that our summarized, clear summary of the licensing. So I'm sorry I put Jim on the hook for that right now, but we'll cover that in the 10.2 session that we're having December.
Yeah, Greg. While Jim's kind of researching that, I saw a few questions. I had answered them in the questions panel, but I just wanted to clarify. There's, I think, some confusion around, or just, some uncertainty around, okay, we're talking specifically to the iPad. Is there a reason for that? And the answer is yes. And just to kind of wrap up some of the answers I had sent out, the iPad has a native application which allows us to consume the active report, which, as we know, is an MHT file, which normally would not be compatible on something like an iOS or really anything non-Windows. There are some other browsers that have plugins that allow you to render MHT files. Those are typically more large client format types of devices. So mobile devices, really active reports, until IBM decides to develop and release a native application for something like the iPhone or Android devices. Right now, the iPad is kind of the only mobile platform that supports active reports because of the fact of how that file is rendered and how it needs to be consumed. So hopefully that clears up a few of the questions. That can I run active reports from other tablets, other devices? Really, you can't at this point, and that doesn't mean you can't consume Cognos mobile content. I should say any Cognos other traditional content reports that would traditionally be run as HTML. Those can be rendered in any HTML-compatible browser, which pretty much is anything that's widely used. But the active report specifically is really only available on that iPad because of the app that was created by IBM. They sent some messaging over the last year that they would be, that they're open to developing apps for other platforms, but they're going to kind of follow the market on that, and it just hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, actually, Thank you for that, Albert. And there is one. We will have a session. We're finalizing the date right now, but check your email, folks. We're going to be having a session on another iOS application called by a third party called Roambee. And you can use Roambee can actually leverage is an iOS charting display BI device or application that runs natively on either the iPad or the iPhone, and it can leverage the existing content that you have in Cognos. It doesn't require you. A lot of people assume that, oh, if I go to another BI tool, I have to build all my new metadata and everything like that. No, you don't. You actually can use your existing Cognos Report Studio reports or Framework Manager models or packages as data sources for this Roambee BI mobile BI product. And it actually would work for Cognos 8 as well as 10, which so that opens it up. So we're putting a session together. We'll probably be in January for that, so just stay tuned.
Hey, Greg, I just want to give you a quick answer to the question that we had you had posed. So there are a number of roles that include the enhanced consumer role. The enhanced consumer role does include the access to the Cognos Mobile as well as the active reports. And so those roles are the administrator role, the BI professional role, the business author role, the mobile consumer. Oops, sorry, no, that does not include it. The just want to grab the rest of these real quick. Professional author, we said, business author, BI business author, BI business manager, and BI business analyst. So all of those roles include enhanced consumer and above.
Great, fantastic. All right. Well, we advertised the session to end at 10:15, and we've gone over here a bit. But like I mentioned, we do want everybody to be very well informed on this. So even if we didn't get to your question here live, we're going to do a write-up response to each of the questions and have that available as a document on Centurus.com as well. So wanted to encourage everybody. The session is going to end. We're going to wrap up now, but want to encourage everybody that we will keep the Q&A pane open so you can ask more questions. And more important, I wanted you guys to take the opportunity to let Jugal know. Give him some feedback. He put a lot of time into this, and we appreciate it. But I have a feeling that you guys do too, and it never hurts to let him know that. So give us your feedback there, and also give us, if you have suggestions for other topics that you'd like to see, we're always looking for that. With that, Jugal, I really want to thank you for putting in an outstanding presentation and demonstration, and very well rehearsed as well. So appreciate that. Albert, as always, you did a fantastic job on the Q&A and the questions. And we look forward to your session coming up that you do with Jim on the Cognos 10 too. Jim, thank you very much too, and Steve and Stephanie also on the panel. All right. Well, with that, we will wrap up the audio portion of the session. Like I mentioned, we'll keep the Q&A pane open, and we encourage everybody to give us feedback on that. And until the next time, December 6th, you can register for it now, but we'll see you then. Thank you.